Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed lunch. This last session of the day is basically going to be about how you improve the positive impact of cloud. Our first speaker is Joydip Basu, engineering manager at Google, and I asked him what he was going to be talking about, and rather nicely he said, how to stop bad things happening. I'm sure that's an object that we all want to get, so Joydip, over to you.
Hello, everybody. I am Joydip Basu. I'm an engineering manager at Google. For the last 8 months or so, I've been working on a team called Incident Response and Management, which is designed to solve the problem about how to make tooling to respond and deal with outages more quickly. But since the Cloud Summit, I will advertise that prior 3 years to that, I was a site reliability manager in a Google Cloud Platform. So I will be at the drinks session if you want to vent at me about any issues with GCP. So I'm very well familiar with the cloud space and the reliability space. Since we just came back from lunch and there might be a post-lunch lull, I thought maybe a quick icebreaker would be if people could put their hands up if they are familiar or think they're familiar with site reliability engineering, SRE. Okay, it's good. It's like more than a third. And then the second question would be same question about postmortems. Are people familiar with this concept and use it? Okay, good. It's roughly the same. So it seems like there's quite a few people who have already been indoctrinated, which is good. So starting off, we'll just dive right in. This is designed to be like a 45-minute talk, so I'm going to try and do my best to skip over things and not keep us here all night. But what is a postmortem? So it's basically a written record of an incident, or as I like to think of it, as a story. What is an incident? So people who haven't heard that term before, generally it means like an outage, right? A customer can't do something, right? Like a page doesn't load or they get an error back. But it can also include other things like a security breach, for example. So these are all classified as incidents. And this story should cover two main sections. One, sort of like, what is the root cause? Why did this incident occur? What were the inputs that triggered it? And then obviously, what are you going to do in the future to make sure that doesn't happen again? SRE in general, for the people who aren't familiar, is a set of techniques that are applied to keep the reliability of mission-critical services high. And postmortems are one technique in the SRE portfolio. Postmortems are not unique to tech, right? They've been used in other industries for a long time. The most common ones are aviation. So when there's an accident, there's always to figure out what was the cause of the accident, how to prevent it, and similar things in the medical field. Like in a surgery, if there's an error, what went wrong and how do you prevent that from happening in the future? So why should we write postmortem? So I think it's fairly obvious from sort of that introductory things why they're good. But specifically, since we're here focusing on cloud, there's an interesting concept in terms of complexity analysis about systems. And I'm not going to go into it in great depth, but there was a theory that in the past about systems can be understood by their subcomponents. And so, for example, let's say you had a system that was built out of Lego bricks, right? So for each Lego brick, you understand the properties of the Lego brick really well, and you're confident what it can and can't do. And then you were to combine these Lego bricks together, you can make some guarantees about how that now tower of Lego bricks would behave. So this was the prevailing theory for a while. But in practice, what we found is that when you throw all these Lego bricks together, and they're not Lego bricks, but cloud components or other software services, even if they're within the same company and written by the people, even on the same team, right? They behave in really strange ways. And the only predictable thing is to launch them, test them out in the real world, and see where those failure points are. And so it's kind of a painful reality, but postmortems are actually a great tool to go and understand complex systems, right? Because you're not going to actually see these problems until they surface. And the other thing about postmortems is that there's a little depressing aspect to them, which is ultimately you want to get to a point where you no longer have outages. That's never going to happen. You're always going to have outages. Instead, what the goal of postmortems is to identify classes of outages figure out how to deal with those classes of problems to make sure those classes of problems don't happen again. But generally what's going to happen is once you solve those classes of issues, there's going to be another set of issues lurking. And obviously the systems are changing all the time, right? So there's that aspect to it. So this is a continuous process. You're never going to get to a point where you're going to have to stop doing this. So investing in how to do postmortems is time well spent. So postmortems, a key concept to make the concept, a key fundamental requirement to make the concept work is the idea of blamelessness. So there's a saying which is humans are bad machinery, and that sounds a little pejorative, but it's more or less a statement of fact, right? Humans just aren't good at a lot of things, and they're really never going to get better at those things. And your ability to actually change their behavior is limited. And a common one is like people like to sleep, right? So it's really not practical to assume that we can ever get humans, at least until science comes up with some miracle achievement, that humans are going to be 24 hours a day and be alert and respond to problems, right? So a lot of people do things like 24/7 rotations, and they carry a pager, and they expect to be woken up in the middle of the night. Good luck with that, right? The human that gets woken up at 3 a.m. is not going to be performing as they were, after having 3 cups of coffee and lunch at 1 p.m. So postmortems generally are focused on things like understanding what systems and processes can be changed, not how humans can be changed. The other key point about blamelessness is psychological safety. So there's 2 aspects to this. One, we want people to contribute information to postmortems freely. And if postmortems start indicating blame, and the picture here is of people pointing fingers at each other, people are going to be hesitant to actually share information and actually give you the root causes and all the details you need to make good judgments. But by making sure that humans are never blamed in a postmortem, people will freely share. And then the corollary to this is that you can actually now share this document quite widely, right? Because it's no longer a vehicle for public shaming. And so now these lessons that people have learned in one incident can be freely shared and not repeated. And so that's what the learn bullet point there it means. And then we could talk about what heroism is in sort of the site reliability engineering field for quite a while. But what it means in this context is postmortems aren't a vehicle for like sharing tales of glory, right? You don't use a postmortem to say, this person did something amazing, and then set an expectation that every other person in the company needs to repeat their example, right? That's not sustainable. So when should you write a postmortem? So this is going to be highly domain specific. And the way this slide goes is kind of from left to right as to like when you must, should, and may. So depending on what exactly your problem space is, you're going to need to come up with criteria about what is like significant for you, right? So these are some common examples. These are common ones that are used at Google, the number of users affected. But again, at Google, there are products that have billions of users like Gmail. Having one user affected maybe is not important, but if that user happens to be somebody who pays you many millions of dollars per year, then you might want a criteria that actually tracks that, like revenue. And then there's other kinds of things where it may not actually be clear at the time of an incident what the impact is, but you're going to have to make a guess. And a good example of this would be like a security breach. So for example, let's say you had an assumption in your system that you were storing some customer information in an encrypted manner, and then you discover that actually you've been storing it as clear text all along. You need to make a judgment as actually what is the likelihood of that causing an issue, right? Like, if this vulnerability were to be known, could a third party actually now exploit this and now gain access to information, and then choose to react accordingly? And generally, like, it's going to be difficult to come up with fine-grained criteria all the time. And so what you're going to want to have is sort of a kind of rule of thumb that you can use. And so one of these is called Severity. So these are just kind of like broad buckets. And you kind of get a feel for like, okay, this is a medium, major, huge, based off of, any combination of criteria. The progressing from left to right, sometimes you'll get away with a problem and catch it before it actually causes customer impact. those are also really good opportunities to do a postmortem, right? Just because you got away with it doesn't mean that you should just ignore it and move on with developing a new feature or something else. It probably means that you got very lucky, and you should treat it as if it really did cause customer impact. And then the rightmost column talks about areas where the customer impact might be fairly minimal, but because these systems are complex, even if it was a really small issue, it was something that nobody expected, right? It was something like kind of like the Heisenberg cat or something like that, right? Like there was something that you actually want to understand more about how this complex system works. So doing a postmortem is a great way to deep dive into that, and so you'll actually get a little more understanding about how your system works, because it's something that wouldn't have been triggered, just through static analysis by looking at code or by something that you predicted based off of like a back of the envelope whiteboard calculation. So who should write a postmortem? So incident management is its own topic, right? And incident management involves both a combination of technical things, but also organizational things, as well as social and personal things, right? Like incidents are stressful. Like it is not something that people generally want to have to do. And so there's an entire set of strategies around how do you make incident management sustainable, right? And there's also one of the aspects of incident management sustainability is that you have to time box it, right? It is not feasible for somebody to be dealing with an issue for 7 straight days without sleep and working in isolation, right? And postmortems can often fall into the same situation. Generally, postmortems should be owned by a single owner, and that's going to be somebody who's close to the problem, may not be somebody who actually is actively working on the problem. So it could be like a manager who's able to sort of own the process and let the engineers worry about other things. It may be somebody who's a developer and not a site reliability engineer, because they understand the code base very well and they can articulate the root causes better. It's whatever makes sense. The key thing about postmortems is that make them as collaborative as possible, and make that collaboration as done in parallel as much as possible. So use any sort of tooling. The market has moved on, and there's lots of great tooling now for collaboration. Anything that allows you to work on something together, definitely that's a good tool to use. So like Google Docs or an Office Doc, something like that, or something else. Just even something like a shared chat board that everybody could edit and incrementally update. So who's going to be the audience for this postmortem? There's the most obvious one, which is like the people who are closest to the problem. So if it's a bug in software, it's probably going to be the dev team who's owns that piece of software. They're going to be the most interested in it. But there are actually different customers who are also really important to consider when writing postmortems. And the first one is probably going to be most applicable to people here who are leaders and focused in on sort of running multiple teams, or maybe even you're like a C-level executive. You're going to want to read as many postmortems as you can get your hands on. At Google, like directors and VPs basically have a standing meeting every day to go and read all the postmortems that happen. The key points are they want to be able to identify patterns across the organization and then decide, based on what they see, how to structure the future work of their organizations. And like I said, postmortems are a story, so you need to keep these audiences in mind as well. So they may not necessarily understand every single subservice that exists or every single code base. So include all the relevant context that they would need, or at least link to other documents that in case that they have the time that they could go read through. But this is definitely something to like hammer home, that if you are managing multiple teams or a large organization and you are doing postmortems but not looking at them, please do. And then to the right, I put this little gray line in here to talk about a set of customers who probably aren't going to consume your postmortem in its standard state. And so those are kind of could be both internal customers, but also external customers. So internal customers might be parts of the organization that are walled off from you, like legal, who may not want to actually be exposed to sort of sensitive data that your postmortem may contain. Or you may have like external customers. So for example, your GCP customer, and there's an incident, you will likely get something called an incident summary, which is a tailored description of the problem, tailored impact for how it affected you, and also what specific steps Google is going to take to fix the problem in the future for you. And so this kind of cuts both ways. Many of you are probably going to be using different cloud services, and some of you are going to be using infrastructure providers, some of you are going to be using people who are building services on top of that. Hopefully, whenever there's an outage, you get an incident summary from them. And if the incident summary from them is, yes, you were affected, and we're sorry, it won't happen again, it's up to you to go back to them and say, I need more clearer declaration of impact and more concrete action items. And if they are following a postmortem process, hopefully that they'll be able to get you that information. So moving on to some of the components of a postmortem, there are three essential things that kind of go together. So they're kind of grouped as kind of like a motto, which is root cause, trigger, and impact. So here's some example ones. I don't think we need to go into the details if you're not deeply technical with code or some of the things here. But basically, a root cause is fundamental. What was the latent problem in the system? The trigger was what specific set of inputs or actions did somebody take to actually make that root cause have an impact, and then obviously the impact itself. So those kind of all have to go together. And then the other critical component of a postmortem are action items, or as they're for short, they're often called AIs or PMAIs. And these are things that are, what are the corrective actions that we're going to take in the future to lessen the severity of the incident or prevent it altogether? And you'll hear different kinds of standard action item types: detection, prevention, mitigation. Those are the most common three. And then toward the end of the slide, there's some optional ones which are kind of more evaluative, such as like what went well, poorly, where we got lucky. So these are different things. Again, these are useful for looking across postmortems, saying that, like, you know, for people to say, if we get lucky all the time, we're not actually, maybe we're manufacturing our luck in our own way, in a way that's not sustainable. For example, if people are glued to dashboards for 24 hours a day and that's how we're getting lucky, that's not really luck, right? And we probably should figure out a way to like automate something like that. And then there's going to also be a need for raw evidence. So these are going to be things like maybe chat transcripts, like if you have an IRC or Slack channel that's used for incident discussion, metrics, so numbers. So it could be any sort of data that's like quantitative data that explains the impact of the problem. The timeline is critical, like when did it start? When did you first notice it? Those may not be the same thing, right? An incident may have actually started months ago, but you only notice it because a customer reported it to you, or somebody was poking around on a log file and saw something problematic, or you eventually added some new alerting, and then that starts catching this problem. So having a full timeline is important for us making an accurate severity estimate. And then, like I said earlier, these systems are going to be complex, so you're going to not be able to, you don't want to reinvent the wheel, link to like documentation, other designs, so that people without appropriate context can go and understand about the system in greater depth. There's a few slides here which talk about a sample postmortem, and specifically all of the attributes of postmortems that are common at Google. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go into them in great depth. There are two books which many of you probably are familiar with. The sample postmortem is contained in these two books, but is also available freely online, so you can actually look at this and review it without even having to buy the books, and the links are available in the slide deck and at the end as well. So you can read through this and kind of see it, but what we'll do is I'll just kind of walk through a sample one based off some of the things that we just talked about. So here is a sample postmortem for a fictitious search service called Shakespeare Search that has indexes all of Shakespeare's sonnets. And it's a classical query of death problem. So the situation here was that somebody discovered a new sonnet of Shakespeare and people are interested in reading it and searching about it, but the system hasn't indexed it. And what's happening is when people start searching for something that this sonnet is about, it could be about anything like skateboarding, potato farming, whatever it is, right? They put this query in to Shakespeare Search, and instead of just getting a not found or something like that, the service actually crashes. And what this is doing is actually, when every search backend is crashing, it's taking that search backend out of service and reducing the amount of server capacity that Shakespeare Search has. So as more people search for this sonnet, the problem gets worse and worse, right? So
can I ask you just to sort of round up as well?
Oh, yeah,
just
yes.
in terms of time.
Oh, sure, yeah. So you can read sort of here like the root cause, trigger, impact here, and then you've got like the AIs for sample AIs and some of the timeline things here. We talked about AIs. Kind of the key thing about it is like with this is just to kind of use something like the 5 whys approach. You start with your impact on top. You like a small child, you repeatedly ask the question why, and eventually you'll find that you come up with concrete action items rather than just saying, yes, users can order product worldwide, but it looks like there's actually multiple things we could do. And then in AIs can come sort of in the spectrum. You can have sort of short-term things, which are Band-Aid fixes. Those are probably critical, but you also want to incorporate long-term fixes, which may actually take years to do. You want to invest in things like detection. Detection is great because, yes, prevention is great. You want to fix the bug once you find it. But you also want to improve detection so that you catch problems before your customers do, like we talked about earlier. But also you want to, detection can have other benefits. You can prevent outages elsewhere in the system. And we talked about humans as bad machinery, so any fallacy that a human has, you want to try and guard against. We talked about sharing them. I think we talked about AIs in general. Postmortems are a living thing, so you're going to have to keep a postmortem alive. Systems may be constantly being architected to always reevaluate AIs. They may need tweaking. Until all AIs are done, the postmortem isn't done. How do you get started? Well, like I said earlier, just to recap, to kind of wrap up, leadership, if you're in leadership position, start at the top, set a culture of blamelessness. Make sure that AIs get acted upon. If AIs don't get acted upon, people will lose faith in the postmortem process. Practice, even if it's incident's not critical, just practice on it. And then, like I said, start simple, perfection can wait. And then here are some more resources to go through for more information on SRE and postmortems in general. So, thank you.
Thank you very much.